All right. Good morning. Good afternoon. Professor Barry here. This week, week number 3, we're moving into small group of the self, kind of ideas about self-identity development, and then getting into groups, organization, including a little bit of Max Weber on bureaucratization, rationalization, institutions. But our primary focus is on understanding theories of the self, self-development, and then getting into stuff related to small group and group processes and things like this. This is kind of an area that if you've taken social psych or mind and society here at the OCC, it kind of spills over a lot of commonality between the two. Like we'll talk about Zimbardo's study, Milgram's study, things you'll talk about in a mind and society class. We talk about them maybe in some ways very similar, but also very different. Um, you know, Part of it's the application of how do we understand human behavior? What are these kind of studies? What do they indicate? And then how do we take that information about understanding human behavior? How do we understand it? What am I trying to say here? How do we what's the value and the importance of understanding the origins of human behavior or what's shaping human behavior? So it kind of gets us into institutions and culture a little bit. It'll make a little bit more sense as we kind of move on. Okay, so it's chapter 4, chapter 5, kind of the chapters that we are after. So there's different ideas about kind of the self. Something to think about, talk about in class is, where do we learn or develop, ideas of who we are? What are the factors that influence our own development? If you go back to like the sociological imagination, so think about for immediately you go, okay, well, it's my family, it's my parents or parent of parents or grandparents or family members. Like those individuals had a profound influence on me. So we can see them as individuals, but let's look at also them as those are individuals that are also kind of taking place, who also have their own socialization based on culture and time and place. So we kind of start to get into thinking about not just individuals, we think about sociological imagination, that history and biography being connected, thinking about the macro level versus thinking about only the individual level kind of thing. So different ideas about the self. One of them is about like there's biological, like our behavior is determined by biology. We say it's biological determinism. Even in neuropsych and mind and brain, I would imagine that most faculty members who teach mind and brain, neuropsych, would definitely talk about the influence of the environment on biology. So nothing is determined purely by biological forces without any social, cultural kind of impact. I say no. I mean, I could be wrong about that. But for the most part, even things that we see as biological are socially and culturally shaped, influenced, supported, those kind of things. Then we see like this idea of this ring of choice, this idea of like kind of free will. It's like, okay, it's our choice to do certain things. Part of it is true. And then there's socialization, culture, environment, context. Now we can start to think about maybe a little bit about determinism, social determinism a little bit, and see the interrelationship, and part of our identity is in there somewhere, a combination between nature and nurture. It's like it's what's going on in terms of shaping who we are. And there's different parts of our identity that we can kind of focus on or try to address. Some of them may be more obvious. Our gender identity, our racial identity, our ability status, the language that we have, our language acquisition, our level of education. So all these different kind of areas are important parts of our identity, as well as parts of socialization. So just some different examples thinking about gender and gender identity, like what influences us to become who we are as a gendered self. Our speech patterns, the clothes that we wear, how we carry our body, our nonverbal communication, the choices that we make in terms of occupational fields. I mean, a lot of different things that are related to gender. What are some things that influence that? Here we see sort of just an image of someone, a medical practitioner. Here's a person who has their body image is different. What they see is different than what it actually is. We get into issues of masculinity and cultural ideas about who two males should be. parts of people's identity related to if they have engaged in a criminal offense, these language and these words shaping our identity. And then this is looking at gender marketing and advertising, and just like even walking as a kid, as an adult, walking down, going to a major like Fred Meyer or Walmart or Target, going down the toy aisle. I mean, kids are learning gendered stuff, right? They're colored, it's pinks and purples, blacks and blues, the toys that are there. Just even kids walking down those aisles, they're learning stuff about gender. And then here's this really funny video. This little girl's kind of her rant against the gender roles. Why is it she won? She's asking the question at a young age. Pretty dang aware, pretty funny, short little video. So let's kind of talk about some different theories of the self. Freud has historical importance and value. He's got some interesting things to sort of offer, but I think, most from an empirical viewpoint, Freud just does not provide a lot of empirical support for his ideas. His groundbreaking ideas at the time, psychoanalytic theory, but the field of psychology has moved well beyond that. So we won't talk really much about Freud, but talk about some more theories that are more social, linked to sociology more. So the ideas of the self. So we're going to distinguish between Cooley, Mead, and then also we're going to get into Goffman and W.I. Thomas as well. So the self, it's a social product that's created through interaction. So we don't come out of the womb with an idea of self. Our self-identity is something that develops over a course of time. Different theories of the self. We have Mead on the one end. Mead he's a behaviorist, believes that everything that our behavior, it's all learned. Everything's learned behavior, even how we urinate, how we go to the bathroom. The physical act, we all need to go to the bathroom, but how we do it is a learned behavior. So he kind of comes up with this sort of idea that we have an I and we have a me. We have different parts of ourself. The socialized or the social self, the one that's being reflexive, is the me. So I'm in a social environment. I'm aware of how other people, I'm the object. I'm aware people are seeing me and observing my actions, my interactions, and that's shaping kind of how I see myself. It's also shaping my behavior. That's the me. And then there's the I, which is the unsocial or the subjective self. And these two are always in interplay with each other, according to Mead. I mean, it's sort of this idea of we develop ourselves. We think before we act is an important part of the Mead's perspective. We think before we act. The question is, what do we think about? And you go through the stages of self to kind of get there. So when kids are really young, the preparatory stage, when they're infants, that they're not really, they're just responding. They're imitating things that are in their environment. So they're at this point, they're not, okay, they're imitating things that are in their environment. They're just reproducing things in their environment. Not necessarily reflexive yet, thinking about those particular things. Then when kids get a certain age, I don't know, 3, 4, 5, 6, they start to play more, get into the play stage, and they take the role of others, and usually a specific other. For Mead, it's like a specific other. So think before you act, and they're thinking about, by taking the role of the other, they're taking the role of mother, father, caretaker, brother, sister, family member, person in the community that they know. So they're taking a role of a specific other. So this is shaping their ideas of self. So they have this sort of me that's going on. They're becoming more reflexive of thinking about, well, how does mom or dad think about that particular action? And that's starting to shape their own identity. Then you get into like the game stage. Kids get a little bit older. The games get a little bit more complicated. They can start manipulating the rules of the game. And this is where they take the role of a generalized other, not necessarily the role of specific other. So the generalized other is an idea of society itself. So I'm driving around a roundabout, getting really frustrated. It's like, man, why don't people move into the roundabout? Somebody cuts somebody else off. Somebody does something that's like really offensive that I find offensive. And I want to, give the person, the middle finger, and I wonder, before I decide to act, before I honk my horn, whatever it may be, is that thinking before I'm acting, I'm wondering what other people around me might think about that. It's not that Mead wouldn't say like we're consciously doing this like 24/7 all the time in every situation, but that we have done this throughout the course of time. It becomes sort of a natural, it just becomes a reflexive response for us. And that all behaviors goes through this sort of process. Thinking before acting. Kids are really young, they're imitating, get to the play stage, they take the role of specific other, then they eventually kids get to take the role of a generalized other or the ideas of society. So they get the idea of society itself. So that's kind of Mead. And then you get into Cooley, the looking glass self. And then the idea is that society and self are twin born. So for Cooley, there's no way to develop an idea of self unless you're immersed in society and groups and people. So the idea of feral children, children that are raised without human contact, like these stories, and these incidences, these actual case examples, like can't develop an idea of self unless there's other people around that person. Think about if you've ever seen Castaway with Tom Hanks. He's got Wilson, he's got the volleyball. So and he's stranded on a desert island, and he paints puts eyes and a mouth, eyebrows on this volleyball. It becomes Wilson. He needs this for his own survival of emotional survival and personal survival, is to have this object that he can reflect back. Like you're thinking about how Wilson is seeing him. This is like classic looking glass stuff. So the parts for Cooley are imagining how we look to others. So part of the process is like, I wonder how that might appear to other people or to that particular person. And then the next part is to evaluate that reaction. I wonder how that person might think about that. And then assigning meaning to that. They think about it this way. And then it's sort of this circular pattern of going around. If I internalize my interpretation of that, and it becomes this kind of part of this, how the self develops. Now it gets pretty complicated because it's all these interactions that we have, even things like social media, mass media, advertising, marketing, that become part of our looking glass self. So it's not only individual interactions that we physically come in contact with, but it's this other world as well. So it's like we develop expectations and understanding based on all these different kind of ideas. So those are like two core ideas of development of self. And then we're going to get at Irving Goffman, which is his idea is dramaturgy or impression management. So Goffman's idea, he was an incredibly influential sociologist in the 1960s, 1970s. He brought the micro perspective into sociology in really significant ways. And his focus was on how everyday life is like a theatrical performance. We are all actors and we're performing. We're managing impressions, and that's the job. That's not the job, or that's the job. That's kind of what we do. Is we take on roles and we perform roles, and we're trying to manage impressions. We put up a front, people might say. And so, like gender, for example, gender is a performance. Managing impressions. So it's the clothes that we wear, how we walk, the language that we use. All these different parts, that's part of a gendered performance. We learn, so this is why it gets into the theory of the self, because we're learning the script. We've learned that script from society, our social groups, and then we start to emulate that script. There's an interaction between the actor and the audience. So sometimes our behavior changes based on who the audience members are. So you're at work versus home, you're with family versus friends. So it's all these different kind of things. So, and then last, it's really not a theory of the self so much, but this W.I. Thomas, the Thomas theorem. If you define it as real, it's real in its consequences. So for Thomas and the Thomas theorem, it's really focuses on our perceptions guide our behavior. So if we define it as real, it's real in its consequences. So if I go back to this kind of picture, right, from a very micro level, if she sees herself this way, that's real. Doesn't matter about the objective reality. Or if I can make this a little bit larger, more macro level and go, if society believes that marijuana causes people to commit murder, then we start to develop laws to address that. And that's 1937 is when we started to criminalize and create institutions to address what are associated with the problems and the menace of marijuana at that time period. So that's the Thomas theorem. Okay. So let's kind of walk through. Now we kind of defined them. Let's give examples, illustrations, and walk through it a little bit more. So Cooley, so I imagine your mind, especially what your mind thinks about my mind, and what your mind thinks about what my mind thinks about your mind. Whoa, right? So all these different levels. I am not what I think I am. I am not what you think I am. I'm what you think I am. So it's that last part I think that's really important. It's like I start to become what I think you think I am. So it's based on our interpretation of other people's responses to us. Now you can see there's a fault going on here, or potential bias, or a potential problem going on here. Faulty reasoning thinking is perceptions may be off. I may be thinking that others are overly critical of me, or that people are overly supportive of me. As an individual or person may think that, right? So accuracy of perceptions could be far off, and it could create a problem. So looking glass self, this is like more of a Mead idea, playing, right? The play stage. These kids are playing a very specific role. They're playing doctor, nurse, medical care professional. Put this here as a looking glass self kind of idea, and also maybe generalized other for Mead. So for looking glass self, this idea of, we see reactions based on straight white teeth, and then that sort of becomes something part of our looking glass self, part of our self-image. It's socialized, right? There's no reason why we have to have any particular meaning associated with particular form of our teeth, but we do. So it becomes part of looking glass self. And then we get into like Mead, maybe a little bit about the generalized other, this sort of societal kind of expectation. A couple different examples, and watch both of these. There's, part of the quiz is based on this. You come up with two different examples. This is more about addressing representations of women. This is to deal with women in mass media and advertising. This is more about masculinity in American culture and society. And this is just kind of I guess there's not a video to that, but in the Pixar film Cars, the reason I incorporated that there is, our kids, when they were really young, they watched this movie. We took them to see it. And you have over here, we have Mater, and it's a social class thing. One of our kids was coming home, or for weeks after the movie, he'd go around the house and go, "My name's Mater, my name's Tomato, but they just call me Mater for short." And I go, "Man, this is really powerful. Like, it's a little bit of imitation, a little bit of modeling, but they're picking up on ideas about." And they're not understanding it this way, but what I hear it as, it's the dumb Southern redneck kind of cultural kind of thing. And they're incorporating that. They're learning ideas without, I think, parents or us even thinking that they're learning anything in that. We can go down further in this sort of pathway. Think about dramaturgy, right? So everything's a theatrical performance. You're working as a customer service, working as a barista. A lot of dramaturgy, right? Interacting with the public. I think any customer service position involves a dramaturgical element. Part of it's coming from the store itself, the apron you have to wear. It's like, why do you have to wear an apron? It's part of the costume or the uniform. Starbucks is trying to present a specific kind of image. Dramaturgy. I'd say here, we're going to incorporate this person who belongs to some white nationalist group. He's performing for two different audiences. One is his own group, right? So performing for his own group. So he's, the language, style, dress, appearance. He's embodying these kind of things. He's given a performance. He's given a performance for his own in-group, but also for the out-group as well. You can think about dramaturgy in the first date. Cute little short video there. Go to the doctor's office. The medical experience is just kind of interesting. And there's a lot of applications of dramaturgy, both from the medical practitioner as well as the patient. The patient has a script. The medical practitioner has a script. It doesn't mean that we don't have any human connectivity going on there, or that we're only kind of like very robotic in our engagement with the script, but there's an expectation that goes along with sort of how that medical practitioner visit works and operates. Even the office itself, right, is the stage. And you got all these things that are going on, right? It's impression management. That's kind of part of that. So there's some expectations. And then as patients, we all kind of do things. Maybe we have a general script, but we all can maybe, ad lib or do different things. Same with medical practitioners. But that's the idea from Goffman. I think a great example of this is looking at male actors who take on female roles and having to learn to perform a gendered role. You could switch around, say females who are trying to play a male role, and the complexity of that. I mean, just think about that for a minute, trying to play an authentic presentation of somebody of a different, somebody of a different sex than one's own, different gender than one's own. And so it's like the complexity of just even walking, style, dress, appearance, how you hold your head, how you hold your arms, how you, all these different aspects that I think you can illustrate how much is learned in terms of our behavior, but then also like how difficult it is to try to learn how to perform somebody else's role, that it's a process. It's possible though, right? And people do it. Okay, so some different specific concepts. Status is so let's talk about status and roles. Status are social positions. So status is like ranking, like, status is social position. There's ascribed status given to you at birth, involuntary. So a person is, male, female, non-differentiated. A person is, their race is an ascribed status. Society ascribes a status to that. It's nothing that person does to get that. It's just an ascribed status. Then there's an achieved status, things that people do to acquire a status. So somebody completes a high school education, a college education. These are achieved statuses. Somebody goes to training school to become a mechanic. That's an achieved status. Then there's a master status, a status that has exceptional importance to oneself as well as to others. This becomes really powerful. You think about it from a looking glass self, but like a master status, somebody, if a gay sociology instructor, a Latina police officer. So we're highlighting, right? Even we do that. Institutions and people oftentimes do that. They identify the race of the individual, and then the position. So this is like a master status. And then there's the embodied status, the physical characteristics that we embody. Somebody's tall, somebody's short, their voice is embodied status. So they're physical attributes. And that's really powerful as well. So for example, CEOs tend to be taller than those who are not. Now, I don't think there's a biological explanation for that. I think there's a social cultural explanation for that. It's the amount of meaning that we give and the status that we give to individuals who are taller on average. And roles are positions that we occupy. And then there's kind of, there's expectations that go along with that. So the position we occupy, like a gendered role or a very specific role, for example, being a customer service worker within a particular organization. This is a good example of status and context. That status sometimes makes sense given a particular context, but it can take the same individual, change the context, and all of a sudden there's a different response and reaction to that individual because status is situated within a particular context. So this is Joshua Bell, a concert musician, violin player, violin musician, violinist. And, if you saw him on stage, he's making an amazing performance. So he does this experiment where he goes to the metro, hangs out, performs, and very few people they don't recognize him, number one, and they don't stop and hear his music. But if you were taking any other environment, it'd be a different experience. I encourage you to watch this Brian Stevenson video, this idea of that we are more than the worst we've ever done. And it's a real powerful kind of example about how labels and that master status can be incredibly powerful in terms of shaping a person's experience. And yeah, I'm not going to talk more about it. I want you to watch that video. It's just a short video, him talking about that. Think about solitary confinement, and we can relate this to ideas about society and the self. Individuals who are the feral children, individuals who are socialized without human contact or don't have human contact for part of their socialization. There's a breakdown of the self. Solitary confinement is another example of that. Significant mental health problems occur for a lot of people who experience solitary confinement. They lose that looking glass self component, and without that human contact, the self breaks down. So you can kind of get into the history of it a little bit. I'm not going to go into the history of it a little bit, but you go back to early penitentiary. Penance is where penitentiary comes from penance. It's a very religious kind of thing. Solitary confinement, 1800s, as we were building prisons and institutions, started in eastern Pennsylvania, right outside of Philadelphia. It was one of the first prisons. Solitary confinement was a common kind of punishment approach. Charles Dickens came to the United States, visited, and couldn't believe the conditions of people in these prisons, and saw solitary confinement as being a very harmful way in which to approach the discipline of the body. And same with John Stuart Mill. Who's the other person I'm thinking of? Can't think of right now. Anyway, but there's a lot of documentation, a lot of evidence of solitary confinement creates for a lot of people a lot of significant mental health problems and struggles. And I think that's more about the punisher than the person being punished, as far as why it's back. There's a cultural dimension going on there, why we do that, all kinds of things. So we try to separate out, nature and nurture. The reality is nature and nurture are interactive. When the hoary old question of nature versus nurture comes around, sides form quickly. People form a side, what they think, what they believe. I mean, the reality is that nature and nurture are intertwined, they're related. But that's where the debate, I think, another debate really starts, is to what degree and how is it nature and or how is it nurture? And there's real implications for how we resolve that or how we think through that relationship between the two. For example, if it's nature, right, we can't control it. So if we think, well, that's just how blank people are, a certain group of people are, because it's a nature explanation. Therefore, it absolves society and groups in society any responsibility for doing anything different, because that's just how that particular group of people are. So then we would talk a little bit about social Darwinism or eugenics. Think about Nazi Germany and this idea of controlling population through genetic manipulation, promoting certain populations to reproduce, discouraging or removing the ability for other groups to reproduce. It's a very nature-driven only kind of thing. And that's very problematic. This is the political implication about if you put it all in that basket. It is equally well if you put it all on the nurture side. I think that can be problematic too. It's a combination between the two. A chapter of a book I'm going to writing, one chapter right fairly soon, is on fragrances, perfumery, and smell. And it's kind of an interesting area. And one of them, I was asking my buddy of mine, thinking about, okay, what extent do you think, I asked him, okay, to what extent do you think that smells, and then there's certain evolutionary adaptive kind of mechanisms going on there. There's a natural kind of component, things that we find repulsive may be actually very helpful because they help self-preservation, right? To stay away from something. I don't think there's too much in modern day society where we're our life is being threatened by some, and the smell is going to help us in terms of self-preservation. But there's some genetic component probably to that, or certain senses more pleasing than others. Like he said, yeah, vomit. It's probably universal that doesn't matter where you are, what culture, you're going to find that smell very unpleasing. So there's the biological part. But other than that, you can start to get outside of that. You go, okay, but body odor. Okay, why do we assign it sort of a negative to body odor? Isn't it just sort of a natural sort of thing, or certain scents, certain smells? I mean, it's a lot of learned stuff, right? And both him and I, our perspectives were that the majority is a nurture component, but there is a nature component there as well. And I don't think we can ever create a study and go, yeah, it's 73.67%, nurture, and 25% nature. I mean, they're interactive. It's how we think through the interactivity between the two. And then epigenetics, a relatively new area of studied investigation, that even our genetics are being influenced by the environment and context that we live in. So something we see as purely biological is it's biology within a particular physical, social, cultural environment context. Humans, we don't exist in a vacuum, is kind of a key part. So nature and nurture, yes, it's not yes or no, it's how much and how and why. I think a good example, one I like to use, is look at violent crime, or look at an expression of violence in society, the number of sexual assaults or the number of rapes within society. And we look at sort of a range going on here. And you go, okay, well, yeah, okay, are males more likely than females to commit sexual assault? The answer is yes. Is there a biological component? Probably a little, to some extent, there's some biological thing going on there. But how much look at the variability among nations and countries. So clearly social and cultural things are going on there. If we see such a significant difference between nations and countries in terms of the rate of sexual assault. And I've heard different things, different people before about sexual assault. It's like, it's just the male, their sexuality, their inability to not hear no. I go back like 1980s, when all that kind of discussion of no means no and how the resistance to that, I think it's much more incorporated in culture today where people, they get it. Like no means no. Doesn't matter who you are, you can stop, but anyway, I think that the violent crime or sexual assault is a good way to kind of illustrate nurture components. So nature only, biological determinism justify inequality. So it removes sort of the sense of responsibility of society itself to addressing these particular things. So here's during the time period of eugenics, of trying to, where, in the United States, other countries, sterilizing Native Americans, people of color, certain classes of women, involuntary sterilization. It wasn't like these women were asking to be sterilized, it was involuntary sterilization. The idea was we could breed a stronger society through genetic selection. So here's an image on the left there, sort of these traits of things that are people who are unfit, and how do we create a society based on those who are fit. We can look at things like that. I brought this up here to kind of look at the nature of, we think about, sometimes people say, well, males are just better at math. Females are just better at language acquisition. Is there a genetic biological component to that? Perhaps to some extent, but there's a significant social cultural kind of component to that, which I think is much more significant. And we can kind of see here, STEM area, not STEM area, different racial groups. There's kind of a trend overall. Okay, STEM and non-STEM areas, different racial groups, men, women. Sometimes the gap is smaller, shorter. And I guess what I was trying to illustrate here, I was looking for a historical example. I guess the point here of looking at is like, look at that and to this kind of reinforce this sort of idea that's driven by biology. But I think we need to ask the question about what's going on that's from a social cultural environment that's shaping those particular outcomes. So sometimes I think we look for things that reinforce our particular viewpoint. Okay, let's talk about social construction of reality, and kind of an important concept, this idea that nothing has any inherent meaning, nothing has any meaning in and of itself, but that things are built on meanings that we develop through interactions with others within a particular historical context and cultural context. So constructs and ideas are human creations. They're not real. So ideas of gender are shaped by history and culture and institutions. There's no one way of identifying ideas about gender and sexuality, for example. These are constructs. Race is a construct. Gender is a construct. These are human creations. So we view the world through these constructs, right? We get socialized into culture, into environment. We develop ideas about gender. These become become constructs that we develop of expectations that go along with being male, being female. We develop sort of ideas about this. It becomes socially constructed. They become institutionalized. So it becomes like the reality. In some ways, it gets taken for granted that we don't even realize the unique nature of it, and it just becomes seen as essential, or that's just kind of the way kind of it is. So these constructs can sometimes be very stable when there's a lot of agreement to those particular constructs of what they mean. So for a long time, ideas about gender, for example, until the 1970s, let's just say from 1930s to the 1970s, really 1950s, 1960s, 70s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, pretty stable in terms of thinking about ideas about gender. We got to also be mindful of intersectionality, of thinking about gender intersecting with race and class, that different ideas of gender were came out of certain class, certain different classes had different ideas of gender, different racial groups had different ideas about gender as well. There may be some overlap, but it's not monolithic. But anyway, there was some gender agreement, general consensus in society about gendered expectations. But then that 1970s and on, right, challenging that very traditional ideas about gender, deconstructing ideas about gender. Where did they come from? And then reconstructing new ideas about gender. So it's constructing a new reality. So language is an important part of it. Meanings become institutionalized to the point where they become reality or become taken for granted. And it's important to remember that meanings are arbitrary, but they're real. So I go back last week, talked about, the Bellamy salute, kids in a school holding their hand up in this way in the United States. There's no reason why we have to have any particular meaning associated with any particular gesture. But until the rise of Hitler and Nazi Germany, the Bellamy salute was incorporated in schools, but then had a different association, right? So we're constructing different realities. So we can apply this to constructing ideas about alcohol. So prohibition, very, peculiar to the United States. It's not the only nation that has bans against alcohol, but if we go back to prohibition, what was that about? Try to understand that. It's a war and a social problem. We actually create, sort of prohibition, institutionalized, forbidding laws against the manufacture and distribution of alcohol, linking alcohol to moral degeneracy, to crime, all these different kind of things. There was a thing of constructing ideas about alcohol and prohibition, during that time period. And we're declaring war. This is very, a very American cultural kind of thing of declaring a war versus trying to manage something. So declaring a war on alcohol, war on crime, a war on drugs. And that language is reflective of very specific cultural kind of notions and ideas. Mothers Against Drunk Driving, 1980s. Kathy Leitner, her daughter was run over by someone who was drinking and driving. I think he was on, quite a few. He had been to... He'd been charged many times in the past and never served. I don't know if he ever served sentence, but he kept on being released. Anyways, she at some point, after her daughter passed away, started advocating for greater social change. Like, we got to do something. There needs to be different rules and regulations around drinking and driving. The interesting thing about this from a research standpoint is the number of fatalities related to drinking and driving were not changing during the time period of Kathy Leitner. It wasn't like all of a sudden drinking and driving the rates were going up, or people who had died as a result of drinking and driving had gone up. They'd been about the same for quite a long time. It's just that now people were starting to define it as a particular social problem. So there's a difference between the objective reality and the constructed reality. Marijuana has a really interesting long history of social construction of drugs. This belief that marijuana is like the destruction of the youth. They're going to smoke marijuana, then they're going to be like going down the alleyway and shooting up heroin, and then they're going to commit murder and mayhem. They're going to go insane and have these weird orgies and wild parties. It's a lot of craziness going on, but there's a racial component to this. There's a class component to this. There's a lot of things that are going on. We won't talk about here. If you're interested, we can talk about it in class. Just let me know. But it's pretty just crazy. No, I shouldn't say crazy. It's reflective of things that are going on at the time historically, as well as political and economic things that are going on. Anslinger, he's the first lead of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics, which gets institutionalized in 1937. So he goes on this sort of moral campaign. This is the most violent causing drug in the history of mankind. He was we call a moral entrepreneur. He was out there, just basically, I think in a lot of ways advocating for increased criminalization because that's his institutional mission. And it wasn't like they're doing this based on, it was based on a lot of constructed ideas at that particular point in time. Here's a trailer to a video that really fun to watch. Here's some things that Anslinger said. You can see the racial kind of dimensions. There's jazz music going on at the time period, which race related to race kind of stuff as well. There's this idea about degeneracy of particular races. The idea of linking it to communism. So he's powerful voice in constructing ideas, constructing reality. Fast forward to the 1980s, a new war on drugs in the 1980s around crack and the crack scare of the 1980s. I mean, I remember this time period I was in, graduated college in 92, undergraduate. That was like 1990, 1980s is when sort of Reagan and Nancy Reagan saying the Just Say No campaign. But then the crack really comes on the scene late 1980s, early 1990s, and it was the panic of the time. And I think, looking back, general public as well as academia go, man, there was a lot of increase, of escalating the sentencing, the way in which policing was going on at that particular time period was problematic. During that time period, during the time period of the scare that was going on, it was hard to be, you try to be a voice of reason in academia, trying to provide a critique of what's going on, of all these 3 strikes you're outlaws, determinate sentencing, trying to lock people up for, small offenses, stop and frisk, all these different kind of policies that start to develop. There wasn't a lot of space for critiquing those kind of things because there was a called moral panic at that time. There was a constructed reality going on, and people were fully embraced in that particular constructed reality. And that led to that crack scare, led to crack scare, not the cocaine scare, but it's, led to mass incarceration. This is why we have almost 25% of the world's incarcerated population is in the United States. We have 5% of the world population overall, but 25% of the incarcerated population. This is in part related to a constructed reality that was going on. Let's just real quick, like the sentencing, there was called determinate sentencing that time period. If a person had a possession of 5 grams of cocaine or a gram of cocaine, they got, let me just restate that. They had 1 gram of powder cocaine. They got I guess it was 500. So if you had 5 grams of powder cocaine or crack cocaine, you got the same sentence as somebody who had 500 grams of powder cocaine. So it's 100 to 1 ratio. So if you could have 100 times the amount of powder cocaine, you get the same sentence as somebody who had that, of crack cocaine. So 100 grams of powder, 1 gram of crack, same sentence. So eventually became viewed as unconstitutional and a violation in terms of racial inequalities that are going on there. People's perceptions about, the toxicity and the dangerousness of drugs, constructing realities around drugs. I think the opioid crisis is definitely another way of thinking about how do we think about drugs? How do we think about drug use? How do we think about individuals who are addicted to drugs or have an addiction? These are all cultural constructed kind of realities. Methamphetamines was another one. And we can kind of go on and on. So think about, drug use and possession as crime, as a criminal justice problem versus a public health problem. 2 different constructed realities. We could use our idea of hegemony. Hegemony is like, okay, how does it the general public agrees to something that benefits the ruling class in some sort of way? So this is a long story here, but I'm not going to go into it. But the war on drugs, if we as a general culture and people supported it, what's going on is we're not taking care of, at that time period, manufacturing jobs were leaving a lot of different areas. Economic struggle was going up. Rather than dealing with and helping to respond to communities in a way of providing supports, move to this place of increased incarceration. So whose interests are served is the interest of the ruling class. That's a hegemonic idea. Portugal, I put that here, as Portugal legalized everything. And they've had pretty good success in terms of seeing it as a public health problem and responding to it that way. I think about, mental health and think about medications. medications can be very valuable. At the same time, we see all these ads. The United States and New Zealand are the only two countries in the developed world or high income countries that allow for direct to consumer advertising of pharmaceuticals. So TV ads, magazine ads, newsprint ads, the United States and New Zealand, the only two countries. It's like, wow, okay. I think there's a link to power. There's a link to our culture in terms of free market as well. But why the United States and only New Zealand, right? What's the public interest being served by pharmaceutical ads and campaigns? You can watch this video as another kind of constructed reality around body hair. I think it's really short, but interesting, engaging, thought-provoking sort of example there. You can think about even fonts, right? And fonts of having particular meaning and constructed realities. You just okay, that's Google, Suzuki, Amazon, Hyatt, Wilson. It's like, wow, that's pretty amazing, right? We get socialized into these kind of things, even fonts, font shapes, size, colors. We get to know them. We'll talk about this in class. We'll talk about this this incident that happened in South America, a rugby team traveling over the Andes Mountains, 1970s, plane crashes. They survive. The people, the search crew gets called off. No one believes that they're alive. They have to figure out how to survive. It's a great example. We'll talk about constructing reality and how reality was constructed. Then we can kind of get into group behavior a little bit. But first of all, this Saslow book, really interesting about somebody who was integrated, came from a family of white nationalists. Eventually, he goes to a liberal arts college and he gets exposed to different ideas, perspectives. Eventually, he moves outside of that sort of white nationalist experience. It's a really interesting story of his particular journey. And it's how we think about group behavior. We are social creatures. Humans are social creatures. We desire belonging, membership, meaning, and community. So when I go back, if I go way back here, I see like this individual not as being a radical in a sense of like non-conforming. I see him very conforming. He's finding meaning, direction, purpose within a particular social group. He's a social being, and he's finding connection. He's finding meaning. He's finding purpose. Now, you may disagree with the ideas that he has, but there's a lot of group things that are going on that are influencing that. Here's a short video interview of about the book and content of the book. So to read that or watch that. Here's the Ash experiment, the famous line study. You can watch that. Just want to kind of communicate sort of the idea to see that what Ash was indicating is that humans are social creatures. We will conform to the group. It's a very pro-social thing. It can get us in trouble. So think about like, well, how do we promote individuals sometimes to speak out, to be able to be a stronger voice? But to say that, that it's a sign of human weakness because we conform, it's like, man, human conformity, we do it all the time. That doesn't make us bad. It makes us human. I think the question becomes one of when does it become problematic and how do we kind of resist sometimes the pressure of the group when it's important for reasons that have to do with moral position and values. So standing in line, a lot of demands like group behavior, like, right, group conformity. No one's cut in line, right? It's like, well, why not, right? Putting a hand over your heart, pledge of allegiance, it's like conformity. I thought about this image of trying to think about, look at a high school yearbook and look at the clothes people wear, even like, it's like clothes people wear, dress style, appearance, class, gender related, different things. There's a lot of conformity that's going on within that. Even 1960s counterculture revolution, even though it's counterculture, trying to change dominant culture, challenge, oppose dominant culture, there's still conformity within that particular group. In Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous, 12-step groups, the idea of changing playmates, changing playgrounds, and the things you play with, an important part for one's own growth and development and stepping away from addiction. And that's hard, right? Because like it's the belonging and connection they get to that particular social group. Here's some different examples as well. So sexual assault on fraternities on college campuses, higher than among the general population, really A lot of social group stuff going on there. Tulsa Race Riot, 1921. I encourage you to watch that as well. Kind of think about from a group behavior viewpoint. Zimbardo and Milgram studies, both of them. You can watch the video here about Milgram's or about Zimbardo study. Milgram study, the famous study where people came into the lab. They were subjects. They were told to, by the experimenter, to give the student, who was called a Confederate. So the student was in on the experiment. The student knew what was going on. The real subject was the person who assigned the role of teacher. So basically, these two people are in a lobby. They come in. Experimenter goes, "You're part of this study. Draw a name out of a hat. Are you going to be the teacher or the student?" The person who's the real subject is always going to be the teacher. They set it up that way. Person gives a question, person gives a wrong response or an inaccurate response. The teacher's supposed to shock the person. And then the person keeps on shocking. The experimenter goes, "Okay, they missed one, go up next notch. And they keep on, giving shocks to the person, even at the point where it's lethal." So these were like crazy profound, influential studies. They have something to offer in terms of what we think about in terms of human behavior, but we need to complicate them a little bit. So Milgram's headline grabbing conclusion that 63% of people obeyed, even, that we can be led to kill people based on this. But that statistic came from his second and most widely reported experiment, which involved 40 people. Milgram conducted 23 different kinds of experiments, different scenarios, scripts, patchwork of experimental conditions conducted with a sample of 20 to 40 people. Obedience rates varied from 0 to 92%, average 43%. Contrary to public opinion, most people actually disobeyed. Obedience in the Milgram paradigm, at least, is not only a matter of relationship to the authority. This is where Milgram's scholarship focuses, but it is only part of the story. Social relationships with people other than the authority figure are a powerful influence. So there's no one else in this environment. There's no one else in the lab. For example, if we take this study and we go, look how bad humans can be, it's like, well, yeah, humans can do kind of horrible things, but obedience to authority and conformity is a powerful force. It's how we think about it, and that we don't overplay this sort of side of like, this is a very nature thing of how humans are. The same with the Stanford prison experiment, is we want to prevent ourselves from falling prey of saying, look, this is how humans are. There's no social environmental dimension to it. This is just what people do. And it gets us so far into the nature side, becomes problematic. And there's a lot of critique. We'll talk a little bit about in class more, the critique of these kind of studies. I'll give you like the real example of the Lord of the Flies. And there's the real Lord of the Flies, where there's like this book here, Lord of the Flies, kids are stranded on an island. This is a fictional book by William Golding. And in the book, it's like these kids start just turn on each other. They become just horrible human beings. The reality is a real situation happened. I think it was in New Zealand. Kids they left school, went on a boat, small little craft. I think a storm came up. They got stranded on an island. No one could find them. They were there for 15 months. And when they were found and discovered, they're all getting along great. They'd formed friendships, and they were part of a group that was based on survival. I mean, that's like the real story, right? So then it becomes the question of which story do we tell? I think this is really profound. There's a friend of mine is telling me that somebody in his neighborhood in California had this flag that said, be a lion, not a sheep. And I thought, it's really interesting, this idea of independence, right? Of be strong, be independent, be a lion, not a sheep. There's a little political dimension going on here. But I thought, lions are part of the pack. They're part of a den. They're part of a what's the word I'm looking for? They're part of a pride, right? That all creatures, there's no creature that exists in isolation. So I just thought that was just one way to think about it. It's like, yeah, I mean, humans can be very sheepish. It's conformity, it's belonging, it's connection, it's meaning, it's purpose. I mean, that's human behavior. To not be that would be to deny our humanity. At the same time, we can be over-conforming too, so that can be problematic. Okay, so McDonaldization, the last concept I need to kind of kind of nearing the end here. So McDonaldization, Weber's idea, focus on rationalization, bureaucratization of society itself. So starting in the 1800s, industrialization, rationalization, more and more bureaucracy. Weber had an idea, it becomes an iron cage, that we get trapped in these systems of rationality. And then this idea of McDonaldization, more recently, a sociologist by name George Ritzer takes the idea of Weber, kind of plays with it. 1950s, McDonald's, the idea of McDonald's expands throughout culture. It's no longer just fast food. It's so many different things. You go to the airport, go take a flight. So many things are, ATMs. I mean, you just go down the list. It become McDonaldized. The principles of McDonaldization are uniformity. So things are the same. You go to any Starbucks, same cup of coffee, right? The same signage, the atmosphere. So it's predictable. So predictability is the second one. Control through automation. So trying to put more mechanisms in place to remove the human intervention. Self-checkouts. Go to the airport, you self-check in your own baggage. Control through, and it's more and more stuff being automated to facilitate that, which is greater efficiency, right? So that there's the relationship there. So efficiency, predictability, control through automation, and then what's called calculability. The bigger, the better. Quantity versus quality. And that becomes an important feature of McDonaldization. And Ritzer's perspective is that Ritzer's perspective is that more and more of our lives are being exposed to things that have become McDonaldized. Think about cultural leveling as an example, going back to last chapter, and cultural imperialism, maybe even as well, is that unique character of particular cities and communities. As things become more and more McDonaldized, especially if like the big box stores kind of move in, it's more efficient, it's more predictable, but there's a consequence to that. And Ritzer's perspective is that we as consumers drive that in part, but there's an economic, a profit motive that's of course driving that as well. There's a reason for it, but there's some drawbacks to it as well. So Karl Marx, our conflict theorist, has a perspective as well, is that all this kind of stuff, McDonaldization creates more alienation in terms of the worker. The worker becomes dehumanized further in the process. So you work at a call center, very efficient. Call center is, all these metrics that are data that's collected on the customer service worker. It's in some ways, it's about efficiency, predictability, getting a script, all these different kind of McDonaldization of customer, of providing customer service, but it's very alienating as a worker, and greater distancing between the producer and the consumer. So it's more impersonal, but it becomes like, you can see it's like an iron cage, like we're trapped in this system in some sort of way. It's difficult to get out of it. So kind of a couple different examples, Charlie Chaplin's Modern Times, the Warehouse of the Future, Ford, which is, the Fordism, that's an idea called scientific management, comes out. Ford sort of really grabs onto it, how to create the sort of model of the factory and efficiency, and has led to making a car every 12 hours to 1 hour and 33 minutes. Like, wow. That's like amazing, the amount of the increased productivity of that kind of stuff. But then think about the workers, think about other kind of things as well. So so I put these kind of things. This is a really fun one about looking at the mechanization of lettuce harvesting. Wild. Local agriculture, less McDonaldized. It's about local farmers, local producers, producer and consumer, less alienated. They're more connected to each other. The producer's part of the community. They're serving the community. I like eggs are a great example. Carrots, any produce is a good example. If you get them from a local farm, they're different sizes, shapes, forms. Go to the supermarket, it's like uniformity. Carrots, man, they're these wonderful, great creatures when they come out of your garden. They're really strange looking sometimes, odd, all these kind of things. But, the supermarket, they're all the same. And part of that's about shipping and distribution. They genetically create the carrot and to be able to do these things. It's the McDonaldization of our food. Here's an example I just thought one day. It's like, think about just waste management. When I was a kid growing up, we actually had garbage workers, sanitation workers, and they would, garbage collectors, and they come by, you put your cans out, and they would dump them in there. Now it's the mechanization, right? People don't even get out of the worker doesn't even get out of the car. You can do a lot more faster, fewer people. And that's kind of very McDonaldized. And then think about, okay, yeah, think about our bodies, and think about digital enhancement of film, digital enhancement of media, going back to the looking glass self. I mean, now we can kind of like start to integrate a couple ideas together. Think about even cultural dimensions, about different ideas, of constructed ideas about our bodies. So all the way from the self, all the way to social construction of reality, all the way to rationalization and Weber, and we can start to incorporate these kind of things. So the iron cage of rationality, we could apply it to so many different areas. Education, do we have to make education more and more online education? It's efficient, it's predictable, but is there something is there a drawback to that? We think about, there's been applications to every area of social life that's becoming more and more McDonaldized. Housing, definitely suburbia is McDonaldization, that particular model. I like the sort of image of thinking, what did our communities look like before the rise and development of this new stage of economic development, in unique local culture or different place. And then finally, you can watch this video. It's called Nordine. It's about prison in Norway, probably viewed as the most humane prison. And you can think about some different things as you watch this video about the beginner's mind, culture, self-determination, language, superior warp hypothesis, construction of reality, status and position, and Zimbardo and Milgram. And we can talk about that as well. All right, so review each of the weekly. I'm not sure why I have that note there. I think it's maybe to myself that we'll kind of go over, the weekly assignments, make sure you're prepared. We're getting ready for the exam. In class, we'll review for the exam, which is next week. So bring your questions to class. Hope you're doing well, and have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you in class.